So they declare independence, and we're going to have to quickly skip over the the war, the Great War of Independence, and move quickly to the Articles of Confederation, where they come together, the colonies come together, and draft the first Constitution of the United States of America. Now, it was confederation, so the states were joined together kind of in a friendly circle, where the central government was so weak that it caused problems. And you can see these in the book. I won't go over them here. But there were some terrific things that were done under the Articles of Confederation. One of them was that the Northwest Ordinance was established, which kind of outlined how the rest of America would be drawn out, and established the policies and procedures for much of what would happen in the next 100 years in America. It's one of what we call the organic documents. There are only 4 organic documents. You're talking about the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Northwest Ordinance is an organic document, one of the most important documents in our history. So it's not as if the Articles of Confederation did nothing, but they were just too weak at the time, and that's understandable. The colonies did not want a strong central government. They had just left a tyranny. So one thing the book talks about, and I'm going to upload these videos, and if you get a chance to watch them, they're really good. It's really interesting to watch what happens during Shays' Rebellion. And basically what happened during Shays' Rebellion is after the war, the American colonies, under the Articles of Confederation, didn't have a lot of power to tax. And you had in western Massachusetts a lot of farmers who had fought in the Revolutionary War, gone to live and now have their farm and live their lives. But now the economy's gone down, you're having problems with the economy under the Articles of Confederation, and you have these farmers who can't pay for this land that they've bought, and a lot of them couldn't buy the land because they were promised money from the government for fighting in the Revolution. So they didn't have that money, and things were falling apart. And back then, if you owed somebody money, they could put you in a debtor's prison. Well, if they put you in a debtor's prison, obviously you're going to lose the farm because you're not there to work it. So it was just a terrible time for a lot of people who had gone out what was West then to make a living. And you had a lot of people who had fought in the Revolutionary War who were now in debtor prisons. Many, and it was not a good place to be. Many of them were dying and were ill. They would die in the winter of cold and freezing. So actual Daniel Shay was a person who had fought in the war and had actually had to create a rebellion to go to the eastern establishment of Massachusetts, where they had the big cities and where they had the banks that were foreclosing on their land and putting these people in debtors' prisons. And they created a rebellion. The interesting thing about that, and I'll put the videos up if you want to watch, is that the person who stood up against this rebellion so strongly was Samuel Adams, who was the same person who was employing the same tactics as these rebellionists, the Shays rebellionists, earlier, a decade earlier, when he was planning the Boston Tea Party. But Samuel Adams did have his philosophical justifications. He thought that since I'm doing this because we're not being represented, it's an unjust government, I have a philosophical justification for these acts. He felt that the Shays rebellionists didn't, because he felt that they were being represented, they were in a representative government, that they were under the jurisdiction, and it was the law. So, but if you get a chance to watch those videos, please watch them, because they're really a fascinating look at the difference in how people thought in a very short time. And I guess it matters who's ruling and who's being ruled at the time. So let's talk about drafting the Constitution. You can read in the book again about the weaknesses and the strengths of the Articles of Confederation. But they come together for the Constitution, and there's a few things, and I'm going to try to not talk about too much that's in the text now. I'm going to talk about some other things that are really important here. What's really important is to understand who came together and whose thoughts these were. And primarily, the father of the Constitution is no doubt James Madison. James Madison was looking to do this long before the thought was going to be that they were going to draft a new constitution. Now, obviously, when they came together at this Continental Congress, the purpose was not to draft an entirely new constitution, but to fix what was wrong with the Articles of Confederation. But a lot of people coming to this convention understood that they might be completely changing and writing something new. And primary of these people was James Madison. James Madison was someone who studied his whole life. He actually was a sickly type person. It was said that he would study late into the night and not get enough sleep, and he actually was kind of small and sickly because he just read so much and was studied so much, and he prepared immensely for this convention, and he was ready. He was ready to propose a new constitution, and that's what exactly they did. Virginia came to the convention early, and they proposed the Virginia Plan. And you'll read in the book where it talks about it favored a little bit more the larger states. So they proposed this plan, the other colonies show up, and the smaller states don't like this plan, so the smaller states come back with the New Jersey plan, and that's where we get the Great Compromise. One thing that the book doesn't talk about that's really important to understand here also is that there was a Hamilton's plan. And Hamilton is a very interesting guy. Alexander Hamilton is probably known as by far the most intelligent of the founding fathers. Now, a lot of people say that this group of men that got together for this convention is maybe in the history of the world one of the greatest meetings of minds. They were all very intelligent people, but of these, Alexander Hamilton is thought to be the most intelligent. He was born in the Caribbean. He was running his family's plantation. I think it was a sugar plantation at the age of like 12 or 13. He was incredibly well-versed in business and contracts, and he comes to America. He was our first Secretary of the Treasury. He instituted, I think, the first Bank of the United States, and he advocated for that. So Alexander Hamilton comes in, and I think most people think that he came up with this plan, and his plan said that we were going to have an executive branch with a president that was so powerful it was almost like a king. Now, this is obviously in contradiction to what most of the people wanted. I mean, that was the problem with the Articles of Confederation. People were so much in fear of a strong executive, they had they had no executive in the Articles of the Confederation, and there were ideas that the presidency should be maybe a cabinet or a group of men or women, a group of men at the time, I'm sure they were thinking. And so he comes up with this plan where you're going to have this strong executive, almost kind of a king-like group of power. And people think this was Hamilton's real idea. I think if you look at the situation, I don't think that's what Hamilton was doing. I think it was a political move. I think he understood we have the Virginia plan, we have the New Jersey plan. He was in favor, I think, of the Virginia plan. So he came out with a plan that was on the other extreme that made the Virginia plan seem like somewhere in the middle. And so they tended to compromise. And there were a few compromises, but I think generally they took the Virginia plan and went through with that. I think it's important, and I think I'm going to create a discussion topic about one of the compromises that they made in drafting the Constitution. They had the Great Compromise between the Virginia and New Jersey plan, between big states and small states. They had the 3/5 compromise. They had the compromise to not decide on slavery, but to postpone the decision for 20 years. And I think that's something that I think we need to look at. What part of compromise should be in politics? I know a lot of people think it's important that we come together and we compromise, but when you look at compromises in politics, so many times they're not good things. and I think we need to look at why we compromise. So the slave importation issue is very important, and we'll have a discussion board topic about that. But then they have the Constitutional Convention. This is so sad. We could do a class on that. We could do a class on the Declaration of Independence. We could do a class on Shays' Rebellion. But they decide to put this Constitution forward, and they decide to say if 9 colonies vote in favor of it, all those 9 colonies will be part of this new Constitution. And that's how they decided to ratify the Constitution. And eventually they do, and you can read about that in the book. And then there basically become two groups that fight for the ratification or not to ratify the document. And that would be the Federalist and Anti-Federalist. So after they write this Constitution and draft it, James Madison goes home to Virginia, Alexander Hamilton and John Jay go back to New York, and they start to write eventually a few essays in a New York paper because New York was pretty much undecided